invite our first speaker. You know, this group here, we're open to all candidates, all incumbents, anybody running. I've said before, you know, if Hillary wanted to walk through that door, she could. Now, whether she stayed long, she'd probably break out in highs, but they're welcome to. But we're open to everybody, because one of the things that I like for our group to be able to have is exposure to all the people that's running for office, all the people that's got ideas that we want to hear and they want to share with us, because that's how we base decisions on who we want to vote for, who we want to select, all these people have ideas. Some of them are very good ideas, and sometimes we hear things that a lot of us never thought about. So it's always enjoyable and delightful to have people that's willing to come here and speak with us about what they're wanting to do and explain to us what their goals are. And we have that opportunity tonight with Andrew Horning, who's all the way from Freedom, Indiana, drove all the way down here. We appreciate Andrew being with us here tonight. Andrew, want to come up? Andrew is running for U.S. Senate on the Libertarian ticket. And after cooking in the sun, firing those rifles. So we're very glad that you're with us here tonight.
Although I don't know about the preface of Hillary Clinton and then relating that to me, but no, I understand. I also understand that I'm coming into Richard Murdoch's backyard and I see all of the signs and the symptoms of republicanism here. And I understand that I'll do well if I get out of here without getting down. So let me just say that I want this to be, you know, I'm going to say some things that are probably going to be very insulting to you because that's my job. But I do speak truth to power. And I figure if I change 100 minds, I'll change 500 minds in Indianapolis.
Can you hold the...
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Basically, I was a constitutionalist before it was cool. I've been a constitutionalist not just in terms of my favorite parts of the U.S. Constitution, but the Indiana Constitution as well. You can find on my website, horningforsenate.com, annotated versions, my annotations of both Indiana and U.S. constitutions. They've actually been used all over the country now. These constitutions tell you how I feel, how I read the constitutions. I think I give you good backup for understanding that my reading of the constitutions is how they were intended to be read and how they were written. And that includes all kinds of things that would be very unpopular now, like citizen militias, which are still in the state and federal constitutions. All of the Bill of Rights, which I know everybody's got their favorite parts and parts they don't like, but I'm okay with all of it. Even Article 8 of the Indiana Constitution, which I think is like socialized schooling, it's still better than what we're doing now. So the preface for what I'm going to say, which is going to be much more insulting later, is really that I always have been a constitutionalist, and I can prove chapter and verse, exact wording, that I am the only Senate candidate who is a constitutionalist, even to the point of saying that I'm the only guy, demonstrably, who believes that unconstitutional rules, laws, statutes are null and void. That would eliminate most of the laws on the books in Indiana and the United States government. Most of them. That would also invalidate most of the treaties. A lot of people think that treaties can usurp the constitutions, but the federal government has no authority to write laws that are in violation of the Constitution. It has no authority to make treaties that are in violation of the Constitution. It doesn't have the authority. So that puts me in extreme opposite from the other guys ideologically. But now let me tell you why, and this is where it gets a little bit testy. Maybe I should get behind the counter here. All right, well, let me tell you why candidates, political parties, and ideology don't matter. They don't matter a whit. And I will tell you that this is not just me saying this. A dozen presidents, including, you probably remember, the military-industrial complex speech from Eisenhower, most of our wisest founders, and 1,000 years of the smartest people in history have all said roughly the same thing. Don't you guys do what you're doing right now. You have what you have chosen. You will always have what you choose, whether you choose with guns or whether you choose with a battle box. You guys have what you've chosen. Now let me just explain what that is. Because when I alluded to the military-industrial complex, the money changers, thousands of years of failure, let me tell you what you probably already know. The Democrats and Republicans get their money from the same pool of people. The media get their money from the same pool of people. The control, all the strings of power are roughly the same people on both sides. Now, if you look to see how history has always worked, and in fact, you can look at graphs. If you want to do this numerically, you could take a look and see what the purchasing power of the United States has been, and you could see that, oh, they would suspend specie payment here in 1813, so that the value of the dollar goes down. They put it back again, comes back up again. During the Civil War, they suspend specie payments. The value of the dollar comes down. They reinstate it after the Civil War, it comes back up. And you can see this kind of graph. Policy is directly linked to hard values, directly linked to reality. So when the United States of America went against the Constitution, we got in 1913 all kinds of horrible stuff, including the Federal Reserve System, you can see that as we started dropping the connection between gold and currency, the value of the dollar started plummeting. After 1971, when our President Nixon, a Republican, by the way, and I'm not going to give you all the Republican history that's bad, you probably already know a lot of it, but the party isn't what you think it is, never has been, never will be. But after that 71 drop of the final link, you know, where Nixon finally ended the Bretton Woods Agreement, so even Europeans couldn't get specie payment for Federal Reserve IOUs, the value dropped like that, and roughly at the same time, if you look at the graph of debt, national debt, it goes like this. It crossed, those two lines crossed back in about 1974. And now, if you look at the graphs, the value of the dollar is like, oh, we've lost 97% of the value of the dollar. And then if you're looking at the national debt curve, if you look at any curve that does that ever, you know what's coming next. Now we have two curves that are going this way and that way. And what I'm getting at here, guys, is this business of us thinking that this is the most important election cycle ever. Maybe it is, but not for the reasons you think it is. You know, Obama's not the enemy that the people who voted him are. You know, the fact that we've had constitutional Republicans for 100 years, like Robert Taft, we've had people like Goldwater, we've had people like Ron Paul, and they always get kicked out of the party. Kicked out. And then you see who, those people that get kicked out of the Republican Party, do something like, oh, they'll go really extreme, and they'll form the Libertarian Party, for instance. Those are all Goldwater supporters. I happen to be, you know, one of the, they call us Christian libertarians, I suppose. I am, you know, a Reformed Presbyterian. We've homeschooled our kids. I'm probably more conservative than, you know, you guys probably think of yourselves as conservative, and I probably would tell you, oh, you guys are way the wrong side. I'm really conservative with lots of stuff. But I'm running as a libertarian not because I love the Libertarian Party, but because we have given too much unto Caesar. And I think I know who Caesar is. It's not the Republicans and Democrats. When you guys vote for any Republican and Democrat right now, what I think you're voting for is the men behind the curtain. The evil men that Wilson referred to, the men behind the curtain that JFK referred to, the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower referred to. A dozen presidents, all the way up through Kennedy, warned us and warned us and warned us. Now, when the warnings stopped, we should have gotten concerned. But we still can look back in history and we can see how all this works. And if you look back in history, you can see how this is going to come out next. It's not for certain that we're going to have hyperinflation. That's not necessarily the way it'll turn out. But default will happen. We will have default. And so when the Democrats and Republicans are going on about how, oh yes, I'm going to save Social Security, maybe it's unconstitutional, but I'm not going to go against it right now. We need to do this and that. I'm telling you right now, we're going to have to make some very uncomfortable decisions very, very soon. And we're going to have to make them based on something. Now, I'm the only one who wants to make it based on the rule of law under existing constitutions as written. And the only reason for that is because I can't think of anything else upon which most people can find some agreement. When I go to groups of Democrats, I can find groups that, you know, I look across the faces and I see similar looking faces, similar kinds of concern. Maybe they've got different issues, but they have some things in common with you that you might not expect. And they're all in the Constitution. If you were to find out what you've got in common with all of your enemies, you're going to find out they've got some parts of the Constitution that they like, and you probably don't very much. And so if you're looking to see how we can take this whole business of politics, the only reason we have government at all is because people don't behave very well. And we've got some of the worst behaved people in the history of the world running our government right now. And if we've got, you know, any thread of sense in our heads, we should use the laws that have been already proven to work better than anything else tried in human history. and they're already law. We don't have to write any laws, and we should be insisting upon this with our vote. And that's where I'm going to start getting a little bit in your face. Because everywhere I go, so far for the last, how long have I been doing this? Almost 20 years now. Most of the places I go, I see lots of nods and yes, you're right. And then at some point, somebody's going to tell me, I wish I could vote for you. But that's where things start getting silly. Because you already have what you voted for. Look around. Now, I'm not running for governor. I'm not running for president. If I were, I could understand some kind of emotional resistance, but gosh, Andy, governor is so important. And so when I ran for governor, they were saying, oh, you have no experience being governor, as if that's some kind of excuse. Or they would say something along the line of, oh, you don't know enough people to staff, a huge government like we need right now. As if that's anything they even want. But what I'm talking about is you've got one shot to get one voice out of 100 in the U.S. Senate. One voice out of 100. Now, you tell me honestly, if Richard Lugar were not to show up for a whole year, would you go running out of your house and say, oh my God, where's Richard? Probably not. You probably would be glad he didn't show up in those cases. But let me just tell you something else that's kind of bothered me about this whole Richard. Lugar, one of the things that I find most silly, in fact, is how we treat politicians. We have all kinds of idolatries, and I guess maybe I shouldn't use the word idolatry. It has kind of religious connotation. But let me explain. When I went to a Republican Party meeting once, I was running as a Republican for U.S. Congress in Indianapolis, and Richard Lugar came into the room. And this person next to me kind of nudged me, don't you feel the electricity? I had to confess that, no, actually, I'm not feeling the electricity at this particular moment. But what I'm getting at is what we typically do is we attribute things to politics that just don't fit. We have a tendency to make idolatry, out of simple human relationships where we put people up on pedestals. And we say, oh, we have to. Oh, we have a two-party system. We've never had a two-party system. Not in law, not in practice. We've never had a two-party system. And arguably, I would say that those two parties are really the same thing now anyway. So what I really want you to do is, I don't know how much time I have. I don't take questions or anything like that. But what I really want you to do is think long and hard about you have one shot at one voice out of 100 that you're going to be sending to the United States of America Senate. That is a pretty important place to have a voice. And is that voice going to be the same thing as usual? Oh, these Democrats are really bad. We're Republicans and we're better. Come on. We've been through this already for 100 years. We have done the same thing for 100 years. The same 100 years that I just referred to after the Federal Reserve System, where our graphs started going like this.
99 years, not 100.
Well, 1913 actually was when the bill was signed into law, but actually, I would go back to even 1903 when we lost citizen militias. That was the aptly named DIP Act, you'll remember, when they decided to suck up all of the state militias. And so we got one of those. In fact, you look at our wisest founders warned us of two key things. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson talked about how he thought that investment banking was worse than standing armies. But in fact, those two always come together. You will never have one without soon getting the other. They always come together. And we were supposed to have a citizen militia like the Swiss. And it was supposed to be where, we were not going to be going over to Afghanistan. If guys like me with bad knees, 54-year-olds, have to get up and go to Afghanistan. You got to be kidding me. Bring them here, guys. I'll take care of them. And I can tell you where I live in Owen County, if we were serious about terrorists, I could get a truckload of deer hunters and give them some body bags and tags and give them some gold. If we were serious, now think about what we're doing instead. We send our own children over on foreign soil to die because we're afraid of guys with exploding underpants. Now, how stupid is this? Well, we have not declared a war constitutionally since World War II. And yet we've not had a year's peace. Wow. Well, you can argue all kinds of things about, which was constitutional or not. At least they did make a declaration, the Congress did make a declaration of war for World War II. And that was the last time that ever happened. Well, 1812, I understand the argument. But, I even can understand when people say something like the 16th Amendment wasn't constitutionally ratified. I hear all of those arguments too, but doggone it, it was close enough. And it's stuck around for long enough that we have to say that we have what we have chosen. And we voted for it not just once, but every election cycle for 100 and so, okay, a long time. Whatever number you want to put on it, the real story behind this is fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me every single election cycle for my whole life? At what point are we going to take responsibility for our votes and say, we have one thing to do in the voting booth? It's not to make a strategic decision, well, I got to take a lesser view. No, you got to choose right or wrong. And I will tell you, honestly, I've not always been a very good voter. In fact, up until about 20 years ago, I was a pretty bad voter. I filled in all the spots, and I would just pick, oh, that's a good sounding name. And I would use, sometimes I'd take a straight ticket thing. But for the last 20 years, I have not picked anybody who's won. And I'm real proud of that, because you can't blame me for any of this. As I leave a lot of spots blank, and if I'm not going to take the time to research a candidate, I am not going to vote for that person. And so, if you ever look at my ballot, and I know a lot of people do it, and I know that, I was actually talking to somebody back there before, they throw out a lot of my votes. I've actually gone back to see how I've written in write-in candidates, or it's an official write-in candidate, there's a button on the machine, I press the button, I say enter, and my vote didn't count. I know that happens. And I know that there's voter fraud. I ran against Julia Carson in 2004, and if only living people were counted, I probably won that race. But the fact that we proved 10% fraud in that district, and yet nobody did anything about it, says two things. Okay, so the voting isn't good. But two, we didn't do anything about it. Even when presented with facts, we don't do anything about it. And the reason I'm coming to you guys now tonight, in Murdoch's backyard, knowing that I'm probably not going to change a whole lot of votes here, is because if I can get behind you guys to understand your accountability and your power in the voting booth, not just because you've got a lot of power with your vote, but you guys have already understood that you've got a lot of power outside your vote too. You can do a lot with your everyday action. And what I'm looking at is any candidate who's got $2 million behind them, well, follow the money. Where does that money come from? Do we even know? Do we ever really care? If you follow it and you see the same old powers that have been there for a long time, you look at the letterhead on some of their fundraisers and you see the same guys that were there for Lugar. What are they investing in? And do they not think that this will be a good investment? Do they not understand that this is not going to change it? Look at how many people in our government have it good. Look at how many lobbyists, probably lobbyists on your side, people in the NRA, they make their living off having a problem. And now if we ever solve those problems and they lose their living, will they, manufacture something? The history of humans is not good. You guys know this as well as I do. We have politics because people misbehave. And the people who tend to misbehave the most tend to go into politics. And that's why our founding fathers, were wise in so many ways, and they warned us about so many things, but the whole point of this is put a leash on these bad dogs. And that's what the constitutions are for. They're to put a leash on politicians, not on you. It's just like what you were talking about. Good people shouldn't have to suffer for the behavior of bad people. And that includes those people who happen to call themselves politicians. So I guess, without knowing how much more time I have or whether they're going to kick me out any minute, you guys have any questions?
Andy, I have a question. My question is this. You seem very well informed on what's going on, even with the other political parties. And one of my frustrations as a lifelong Republican has been that many of the people who are put forth by the Republican Party, which is the fault of the ground roots Republican, as it were, is that they don't believe in the principles of the Republican Party. I've followed your career as being non-elected for several cycles. You did brilliant.
You can say a loser.
You did brilliant during the debates for the last governor's race you were in, by the way. really appreciated that. My question is this: do you have any specific difficulties with the platforms of the Republican Party? Because, you know, I'm a Republican precinct candidate, and I want to vote for the person who most well supports that.
But my point is, ideology doesn't matter if you can follow the money and see that something else is at play. And if you understand how this has been working for the last 100 years, you can see which candidate. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that I like everything that Ron Paul has ever done, but I will tell you one thing. He was incorruptible, and everybody knew it. He was also somebody who didn't get nearly as much money to run for elections as a lot of people up until 2008, when all of a sudden he got young people into the party. The GOP should have woken up and said, wow, there's something going on here, but instead, they changed the rules in the 2000 convention. They've done it again this time around. They did everything they could to kick this guy out. Now, I don't care one way or the other, you know, whether he's going to run as a Republican or what. All of these things are abstract labels. Libertarians are not perfect because libertarian is an abstract label. It's a tribal thing. I hate this tribalism. If I could run as an independent in Indiana, I would have. I looked into it. It's essentially impossible. Now, if you look to see what we do with political parties, it's the same thing we do when it's Colts versus somebody else. It's just tribalism, and I hate it. I hate that stuff. I wish we would start thinking more seriously about what's at stake here. It's our children, by the way, that we don't seem to mind selling into debt. We don't mind sending them off to die. We don't seem to mind the fact that we have an unsustainable problem in terms of what our government is doing and which direction we're going. We don't seem to care very much because we have what are called monkey traps. And you guys know what I mean by a monkey trap. You know, you have a hollow out board, put a little hole in it that's big enough for a monkey to slip its hand through, but not if it grabs the banana that's in that board. And then they can't pull their hand out. Now, everybody's got a monkey trap thing. I'm reaching to the, you know, I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to think about retirement. I understand the allure of Social Security. I understand the allure of medical insurance. But I worked my whole life in the medical industry, and I would rather have health care than health insurance. And we never think like that. We don't ever dissect out, is what we want really what we're being handed, or are we being deceived? And look at how quick we are to be deceived because we're so busy paying our taxes, so busy trying to find out, you know, how do we manage our lives around complicated rules? I even had somebody tell me once, and it's with a straight face, we live in a complicated, cruel world. We need complicated, cruel laws. I was like, what the heck was that about? You know, what are we thinking? When we have that kind of a world where we believe what we're being told, when obviously it's not working, obviously we have huge problems. We have to think more soundly for ourselves. We have to think not as a group of individuals, not as black people or gay people or Republicans or Democrats, but as individual humans who are accountable for our choices. Yes?
Yeah, on Reagan started Family Values back in about '84 with parental involvement, looking at problem visitation. I've been trying to get visitation enforced for 30 years, back before my daughter was emancipated, etc. The Constitution, our 14th Amendment, Section 5 says Congress has the power to enforce. So why?
Well, that's not exactly correct. I have an entirely different view of the 14th Amendment than a lot of people do. Since the federal government has very few powers actually allocated to it and only 5 federal crimes, and, you know, the fact that we attribute so much power to the federal government because of the 14th Amendment is absolutely incorrect. If we were to take the 14th Amendment interpretation the way some people want to apply it and say that state constitutions don't matter and federal government is everything, then we wouldn't have any state powers left either that are outside the federal constitution. And that would mean that we can't write laws about stuff like Article 8. You know, we couldn't have common schools. We couldn't do most of this stuff that we have powers for written into our constitution at the state level.
Okay.
I guess what I would say is that this is not a federal issue, as far as I'm concerned, other than the fact that I am also, you know, unlike any other Senate candidate I've ever heard of, in fact, in the last 50 years, I make my vow to both the United States Constitution and the Indiana Constitution because if you look at the design of both constitutions, the senator is sent to Washington, D.C. not to represent the people, but to defend the state against federal intrusion. So originally, senators were appointed, not elected until the 17th Amendment.
Right.
So I guess what I would say, only, you know, in so much as your issue isn't a federal issue, it is in the state constitution a problematic issue, and that is the kind of thing that I would be all about enforcing. But the specifics of it are things that we have to discuss later, because it's much more complicated than saying this is even a constitutional issue.
The reason I asked about the Fed is
Let's
because
take
they
two
passed
more
federal
questions.
laws on it.
Well, I'll talk to you in a minute. It really isn't a federal issue. Yeah.
2 more questions.
Yes.
You know, there must be something wrong with you.
Indianapolis Star keeps a
I've
list.
understood everything you said. And I am befuddled by the fact that it must be true also that what I heard, that most people don't want to be bothered with any of this. They're too busy being concerned with what belt goes with what shoes. You know, and what's all.
And you could say that's not my concern.
Here's my point. Given all of that, what is the reasoning or the answer to the fact that, according to the news, where we are right now, the candidates are neck and neck, you know, about within a point or two. And I'm thinking, well, knowing what I know about it, and I follow it pretty close, as far as I'm concerned, I'd be surprised if President Obama, pardon me, expression, well, I'd be surprised if he got 30%. You know, and it ought to be like this.
Well, let me just tell you also that a good part of what I've been trying to express is that it doesn't matter. The guys in charge are still going to be in charge. No matter who wins that election, the guys in charge are going to be in charge. That's my point. And unless we vote against that system, you know, this whole business is a crony network is what it is. It's you've got money changers, and you've got military industrialists, and you've got media moguls. You don't have political parties. You don't have candidates. We have not voted for candidates for a long time because we've been voting tribe, and that tribe is owned. You know, you've got club rules. If you own the club, you decide what the rules are. The Republicans decide what the Republican rules are. The Democrats decide what the Democrat rules are. But both of them are owned by guys who say, we bought you guys both fair and square.
Yeah, but I don't want to be a communist.
You don't have to be. My point also.
The guy that's in there now, he's determined to make us that way.
Well, he's not the guy who's in there. The people who voted for him want this. And the fact that all of us have been voting for some degree of socialism, the Republicans have been doing this. Look at Nixon's wage and price controls. He gave us the EPA. You know, look at to see who's actually done what. If you look at the spending after each presidency, I love Reagan's. What Reagan said was great. What his radio shows between his gubernatorial race, his governorship, and presidency, great stuff. I love it. It was just brilliant. But what he did as president, get out of town. Look to see what he had to do to stack the deck so he could even get the presidency, who he had to pick for vice president, who he had available to him for his cabinet. Look what he had for a Congress. We've got a system that we need to destroy. It's not candidates, it's not parties. That whole system is something we need to vote against. I guess I don't know who to
How do
pick.
you get rid of the shadow government?
And Andy's going to stay around.
I'll stick around.
One more question, and then we'll.
One thing, you seem to be absolutely against a strong military, where you come.
Oh, no. I'm all about the strongest military in the universe.
About the military people, and, you know,
No.
and military spending.
Let's be clear on this. When you say something about, you know, thank a soldier for your freedoms, you're dismissing an awful lot the citizens have done, starting with the citizen militias that beat the global superpower not just once, but twice, the citizen militias that fought in the Civil War, the citizen militias that fought in the Spanish-American War. We didn't have anything but citizen militias until we decided, you know what, we need professionals to
But
take
the
it.
military complex behind them is helping a hell of a lot
The
too.
military complex behind them is what we need to oppose, because let's be clear here. I want to be real clear on one thing. When somebody's going to take away your liberties, who's it going to be? Is it going to be me? Is it going to be some, you know, it's going to be some...
Your government.
It's the government. It's their guns. It's their guys with guns. Look at our police force right now. What do you guys think about the militarization of the police force? I think the last time I came here, I don't know if it was 4 years ago, I think I talked to this very group about my concern about the fact that the Boone County Police got a armored personnel, an amphibious armored personnel carrier. That was years ago. Now everybody's got one. Now look to see what kind of SWAT teams we have. They've got these black uniforms that are intended to look scary. My gosh, why else would you make these guys look worse than anything Hitler ever summoned against his people? You know, we've got these big cars with the Ram bumpers on the front. What are they getting ready for? Why are they buying so much ammunition? Why are our police agencies multiplying to the point where park rangers and everybody can give you a ticket, they can shoot you for all kinds of... We've got a big problem here, guys. Our professional armed authorities do what they're told. And if you've got an army that's powerful enough to go beat up somebody overseas, if somebody tells them to come here and beat up people like what happened after Katrina, what are they going to do? They're going to do just what they've already done here in this country. It's not just the Indians, guys. It's not just the black people. They've already done it here in this country to American citizens who are law-abiding citizens trying to defend their own property. They got their guns taken away. They got shoved out of their houses. They got treated like dirt. Now, that's already happened. And since that time, our government has got better armed, it's gotten a lot more secretive, and it's gotten a lot more scary. That's who we should be afraid of. I'm not afraid of the Arabs. Bring them on. Bring anybody on you want. If they have the money to get across the ocean and get on our shores, we can take them. We can easily take them. You guys in this room know how this really works. We couldn't beat the Vietnamese on their own soil. We couldn't beat the Koreans on their own soil. We can't beat anybody on their own soil.
Beat the Vietnamese, we couldn't beat China.
Well, the way it always works is you've got an armed populace prepared to defend themselves, and you've got a world to hurt. Unless you're prepared to use nuclear weapons and level the whole thing, then we've got nukes. You know, guys, you know, if you want to talk about strong military, what I'm talking about is invincible. If we did the constitutional design, this is the design, these were the people that beat the global superpower twice with no money, no government to speak of, and really bad weapons. We've got a lot better now. I think I need to cut it off.
Well, yeah, I take Andy, if you will. There was two other questions. Go ahead, if you can answer them quickly.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Kevin?
The one I was going to ask is that Pence has said something about starting an office of federalism. Have you followed that? Is that not something you would think would be a good idea or not?
Well, he got that from me.
Okay,
He
that's
really
fine.
did. But
Well, I'm thinking that's, like Jim said, I think a lot of this stuff's going to have to start right here.
Well, about 15
Right
years
here in
ago,
this state.
15 years ago, I offered two things that actually did kind of take off. And some people even proposed them in different places. And one of them was even brought up in Texas. Somebody I knew actually had it brought up there. One is the sunset provision, whether it's going to be an amendment or whatever, is sunset on all agencies, powers, laws. Everything has a sunset to it. The other thing is an agency whose only power is to take away powers from the government according to the Constitution. So if it ain't constitutional, it makes a plan by which they can evolve, our unfair dependencies and stuff over time. And so its only real job would be to get us back to constitutional size and make sure it doesn't go away. And if that's the only power, that would become the teeth behind the Constitution.
Okay, Bob?
I don't want you to comment on it. I'm just going to make a comment. I don't need to comment on it. The news media has told us that Obama is a constitutional attorney. Anytime you guys hear this, whoever says it to you, quickly say, no, he is not. He taught night courses. He was an adjunct professor, which meant that he taught night courses. He was not a professor that had not obtained full professorship, nor did he ever obtain full professorship. He is not a constitutional authority.
Well,
Don't let that one slip by you.
I would want to make one comment on that, though, because we all also are too quick to hand off to Supreme Courts, either in Indiana or in the United States, the job of interpreting the Constitution when that was never their job. The job of enforcing the Constitutions of the United States and Indiana is us.
It's the three branches of government, equal branches.
Well,
not the Supreme Court being supreme.
You're only talking about government. The real first branch in any government that's stated in every constitution across the country is us.
We the people.
That's it. Well, many thanks for being here.